Hi everyone, just checking my sound. Hi, Caryn Zinn, Dietitian here. How are you this evening? Welcome to my Facebook Live. I'm going to be talking this evening about dietary fibre. So hopefully you guys can join me if you're interested in this topic. And feel free once you join me to throw in, hi Katie, throw in some questions or some comments or just some general banter, or just say hi. And if you like what you hear and you like the discussion and you like the overall philosophy and the context of the session, it forms a key component of our pre-cure nutrition course, PK 102, which is starting on the 1st of March. So if nutrition is your thing, then you might want to do one of our modules or do one of our courses. Contact Pre-Cure for the details. So back onto fibre. Great. Hi Rosie, lovely that you could join us this evening. I want to talk about five key things here. So some of it will be quite simple. So I want to talk about what fibre actually is. I want to talk about where we get it from. I want to talk about how much we need. Why do we need it, if we need it at all? And then finally, that will lead me into some of the key controversies around fibre. You would think something like dietary fibre would not be controversial. In the world of nutrition, we've got so much controversy, and I mean, you like to think that fibre isn't one of those controversial issues, but seriously, there's lots of interesting evidence around, and we need to question these things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But firstly, some of the basic stuff. What is fibre? Well, it is a non-starch polysaccharide. And what I mean by that, the word polysaccharide means sugar, long chains of sugar. Don't panic. There's not there's not lots of sugar in your high fibre foods necessarily, but it is classed as a carbohydrate. As opposed to a protein or a fat. So it's a saccharide, but it doesn't have any starch attributed to it. So in other words, it's not digested by the body. It is really just the indigestible part of plants. That's really what it is. So when you eat dietary fibre, it really travels through our intestines reasonably unchanged or untouched, and of course you will know that it comes out the other end. So you can see why some people are skeptics and going, well, if we eat it and it's largely untouched and it comes out the other end, do we really need it? And let's talk more about that. Okay, so we know what it is. Where do we find it? We find it in plants. So it is sort of the outer casings or the husks of plants, and we can describe fibre in two types really, or two components. One is called soluble fibre, is one component of dietary fibre. The other is called insoluble fibre, and the difference between them really is how it sounds. The one is soluble in water, which is soluble fibre, and one is insoluble in water, doesn't dissolve in water. They have slightly different functions in the body, and your insoluble fibre is the fibre that really forms the bulk of what moves through your intestines and large bowel and comes out the other end. Soluble fibre, if you look at, we're going to look at where you get them from in a minute, but when you look at some of the research that has been done about soluble versus insoluble and which is better for health, you could probably spin both soluble and insoluble, beneficial for different components of health. But I guess the general consensus, if you want to use that word in nutrition, which it can be a little bit dangerous, but if you had to, you would say consensus is that soluble fibre is the most beneficial for prevention of chronic diseases, which is really what we're all about here at Pre-Cure. Prevention is cure. Right, so soluble fibre, where do we get it from? We get it from fruit, we get it from vegetables, we get it from oats, from nuts and seeds, and from legumes. Okay, so think about how that could all add up throughout your day. Insoluble fibre, where do we get that from? Again, we get that from fruit and vegetables. We get that a little bit from all the other foods that I mentioned, but we get insoluble fiber mostly from whole grains. So whole grain breads and cereals and products is where we get our insoluble fiber from. So taking that into consideration, how much fiber do we need? Again, some people will say there's no actual need for any fiber. We need zero. I'm not saying that I'm there yet. But I don't always go with general nutrition guidelines, but for, in this case, I think a high fiber diet or a highish fiber diet can be very beneficial for various reasons. It might not necessarily be the reasons that we think, but are still very beneficial. So what am I prattling on about? We need between 25 and 30 grams of fiber a day, roughly. The guideline is if you have any kind of chronic disease or need that extra benefit from fiber, that can stretch up to 40 grams of fiber a day. Generally, New Zealanders eat just below the fiber requirement, and I guess a guideline is always to increase fiber intake, and that's one of the pushes of the 5+ a day campaign for fruit and vegetables. Rosie, I've got the answer for you. I will absolutely help you with your question, which is I'm LCHF, low carbohydrate, healthy fat, so don't eat whole grains. Help. I will absolutely help in a minute. So I'll get to that when we talk about controversies. But I want to just illustrate where, from a practical angle, where do we get our fiber from? So I brought some trusty props with me this evening. An avocado, which is sitting in my fridge. It's a beautiful avocado, actually, just ready to be eaten. One avocado has 6 grams of fiber. Okay, so eating the whole avocado is quite a lot of calories, quite a lot of fat, but again, good quality fat, and it depends on which way you're eating. In which you'll be guided to how much of this avocado to eat. But this is just a gauge to show you how it adds up. So this whole thing gives you about 6 grams of dietary fiber. I've also got some trusty linseeds that I got out of my fridge. Keep them in the fridge because you don't want them to go rancid. And linseeds, I would read the label, but I actually can't see labels these days because the writing is too small. So I've written it down. 2 teaspoons of these linseeds would give you about 2.3 grams of fiber. 2 teaspoons of linseeds are very, very little. You could put this another way. If you had, so this is 300 grams of linseeds. If you had a third of the pack, that's a lot of linseeds, but just to illustrate a point, if you had a third of the pack, that would give you 23 grams of dietary fiber, which is pretty much almost meeting your fiber requirements. So linseeds would be something really good to add into your day if you want to lift up your fiber intake and you're worried about it. That's part of the answer for you, Rosie, but not the whole thing. We'll get to that. Right, chia seeds, black chia seeds, white chia seeds, whatever. 30 gram serve, which is round about 2 tablespoons or so, would give you around 12 grams of dietary fiber. So that's a lot of fiber you get from these little guys. 2 tablespoons is not a lot. A really good breakfast meal or even dessert is chia seeds mixed with coconut milk or coconut cream into a nice gelatinous pudding. So you can get quite a lot of dietary fiber that you wouldn't really be able to get in other breakfast options like yogurt. So not saying that yogurt's great, but it doesn't give you any dietary fiber. So this would be something that you could use. Dry roasted almonds, what do I got here? 30 grams, so again, very, very small amount, doesn't even fit into the palm of your hand, would give you around, about 3.5 grams of dietary fiber. So not a lot, but think about if you're having a few almonds here and there, a little bit of avocado, nuts and seeds, chia seeds, you'd get quite a lot of dietary fiber from there. And that's not even mentioning the biggest contributor of dietary fiber, which is vegetables. So here's part of the answer to your question, Rosie, is you certainly don't have to eat whole grain breads or cereals or products to get fiber. And I'm going to come back to that in the controversial section, but I will say, and I've written this down somewhere on this piece of paper that I'm struggling to find, but I'll have to come back to it. A piece of, 4 or 5 florets of broccoli would give you a good 4 or 5 grams of dietary fiber. Whereas a piece of whole grain bread might only give you 3 or 4 grams of dietary fiber. So if you're substituting some of those breads and cereals for vegetables, non-starchy vegetables in particular for you, Rosie, would give you a staggering amount of fiber when you add it up. The best way to look at whether you're getting enough fiber is to actually go onto an app. And depending on what device you have or where in the world you live, you can choose a different app. So I would show you the app, but it's on my phone, and I'm doing this live Facebook from my phone, so I can't show you, and I don't have another one handy. But if you've got I don't have another one at all, really. But if you've got an iPhone or iPad and you go onto an app called Easy Diet Diary, it's got an Australian and New Zealand database of foods, and you type in the food and it brings up the dietary fiber. So it's an easy way to find out whether you're meeting your fiber recommendations or not. So there's Easy Diet Diary for people who don't have iPhones or iDevices. There is Fat Secret, which is Android or non-i. There is also, MyFitnessPal, which tends to be quite inaccurate. There are other ones called My Net Diary, Chronometer, all sorts. I like Easy Diet Diary and Fat Secret. So if your interest is piqued, do a little exercise and add up your dietary fiber. Right. The next point I want to talk about is why we need dietary fiber. So again, this is where the controversial aspect comes in. We have been led to believe via studies, and we'll talk about the studies in a minute, that fiber is very, very good for our digestive health. Okay, very, very good to keep us regular, to prevent constipation, and also can be very useful, particularly soluble fiber, for helping control blood sugar, for protecting against certain diseases, even things like cancer and diabetes. So it can be quite protective. Now, I just want to also talk about the nature of these studies. So this whole fiber protects against cardiovascular disease, and fiber protects against cancer. Those relationships, they might well and truly be true, and I hope they are, because that's what I actually believe. They've come from association-based studies. So they've done association-based studies, or epidemiological studies, is when populations are examined. The 7-country study was a classic example. So researchers look at populations and they measure what they eat, which is quite hard to do really, but they get 24-hour recalls or diet records or things, and then they look at how different components of the diet and how they relate to certain diseases, and they make associations. So people who had a higher dietary fiber component tended to have a lower risk of having cardiovascular disease. So you can do like a cross-sectional analysis where you take a population and you just look at their diet and the incidence of disease, and you make those associations. Or you could look at more of a longitudinal trial, so they follow people over like 4 or 5 years, and they measure their dietary intake a few times, hopefully a few times, to make it a better quality study, and then look at the incidence of disease. So dietary fiber has come through fairly strongly as something that's been that is very beneficial. And again, let's hope that theory isn't going to be debunked like the saturated fat heart disease theory. But things change in nutrition all the time. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But one of the functions of dietary fiber that is very intriguing is its effect on gut health. And and we know very, very little about gut health and the microbiota, or the bugs that are our residents that take up that live in our gut. We do know that fiber and the role of fiber is to feed these bugs. So they actually take the fiber to make fuel, and what they make from the fiber are short chain fatty acids. One of them is called butyrate, one of them is called acetate, one of them is called propionate. And these short chain fatty acids have been shown in some studies to have very beneficial metabolic health effects in the body, including some that I just mentioned, like improving blood sugar control, having quite an anti-inflammatory effect on the gut and on also the system in general. So we know that the short chain fatty acids are good, and we know that the fiber is processed as fuel from the bugs to produce these short chain fatty acids. What we don't know is if you have a low fiber diet, but a good quality low fiber diet, we don't know how this affects the microbes that live with us. Those studies haven't been done yet. So I want to just end by talking about these controversies, because I think it's quite useful to be aware. You can follow any dietary system, any dietary regime, any philosophy. I think it's very useful to be aware of the critics, of the people who try and debunk some of these relationships. And there is a group out there that basically says that we have no requirement, we have no need for dietary fiber. So that's quite interesting, I think. And when you look at the relationship between fiber and chronic disease, is it the actual fiber that goes through the system itself, or is it what the foods that contain the fiber also bring to the party, like some of the vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals, the things that you don't get in pills, you get in whole foods. So it is a complex story, and there is a group of people that have embarked on the carnivore diet, where it's literally not having anything apart from meats or different meats. And suddenly their health conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and various other things get better. And you can't say, well, that's nonsense. That's actually what does happen to some people. So I think there are some groups where mainstream nutrition might not work for them, and then they might change to maybe like a more anti-inflammatory, lower carb, even keto type of approach. That might not even working. Hi May. That might not even work for them to the greatest extent that it could. So fiber is high residue, so it's got a lot of residue, moves through your system, right? That's why it keeps you regular and prevents constipation. Well, I had a client the other week who was eating literally like 10 to 12 cups of vegetables a day, and they were intensely constipated. So you have to wonder about certain cases. Now, we're not talking about population health, we're talking about personal health. So the critics, the anti-fiber critics, are saying if you've got any really severe gut-related or bowel-related issues, and your bowel's inflamed, by pushing a whole lot of high residue fiber in there, is it going to be anti-inflammatory, or is it going to inflame things more? And I guess a way to describe it is that if you are driving in a car down a one-lane highway or one-lane bridge, and the bridge is on fire, the sides of the bridge is on fire, and you are going through in your car trying to avoid the fire, and suddenly you take 10 cars, and 10 cars have all got to get through this bridge and try not to get on fire, and typically a few of them might catch on fire. The same as if you've got an inflamed bowel, the more fiber you have, the more bulk you have, the more you've got to get that through this inflamed tube for some people that might not be the best thing, and that's why for very inflamed bowels, we look at a low residue diet. So you've actually got to go lower in fiber. So please don't confuse personal health when you've got personal clinical issues that are related to the bowel where mainstream medicine hasn't helped you, versus population public health guidelines. From where I sit at the moment, I work in both spheres. So if it's individual health, I would advise accordingly. But from where I sit at the moment, I still believe that fiber is a very important component of the diet. And I think it has a big role to play in a well-functioning body, particularly for gut health. I'd like to finish by coming back to Rosie's point about low-carb, healthy fat. There was a recent study done and published in The Lancet, actually, which is a really high-quality journal, looking at the relationship between fiber, or analysing the relationship between fiber and heart disease and various chronic conditions. And the bottom line was that fiber is incredibly beneficial. But which is great, but it's awesome. But what came with that article was also a criticism by the authors saying people on low-carb diets need to watch out because fiber is really important for you. Because it's virtually impossible to get enough fiber on a low-carb diet. Not true. Not true at all. In fact, I published a study with a couple of Australian dietitians and clinicians last year that looked at a mainstream diet, and it looked at a low-carb diet around 65 grams of carbohydrate, which is moderately low carb, and the fiber intake was way above 40 grams a day, and there was no problem there. Combination of both soluble and insoluble fiber. So it's absolutely nonsense that you can't get enough fiber on a low-carb diet. Anyone who tallies their fiber up and is not getting to anywhere above 20 grams might not be eating what we call a well-formulated low-carbohydrate healthy fat diet. And it might be that you need more of these things. You might need more non-starchy vegetables like lots of greens and lots of mushrooms and capsicum and leeks and all sorts of vegetables, and of course a little bit of fruit as well. Nuts and seeds give you not per teaspoon a lot, but cumulatively all add up to enough fiber. Yeah, so the diverticulitis is a really good example. Diverticulitis is an inflammatory condition. Diverticulosis is a bowel condition, but diverticulitis is when that state is in a very inflammatory state. So what I would do with them is actually take away some of that inflammatory stuff. So there are foods like grains, for instance, and sometimes dairy that can be quite inflammatory. And I might actually go and look more at a low fiber diet until things settle down, and then you can bring some fiber back in. Again, I don't want to necessarily give medical advice to your person, but this is the nature of what of what I would do. Great. So you were at a conference yesterday. I'm just trying to see. Brendan, cool. You were at a conference yesterday discussing the studies, exactly how low carb diets. Cool. That's cool. Yeah, you're right. There is a difference between net carbs and total carbs. So remember, total carbs is your carbohydrate plus your dietary fiber. Net carbs are your total carbs minus your dietary fiber. So as an example, this will be 7 grams of, 6 grams of fiber. So it has, and 7 grams of total carbohydrate. So in other words, that has 1 gram of net carbohydrate. So it's really important to make sure that you tease the two out. We tend to work in total carbohydrate because not everyone has the same effect by not absorbing anything from that fiber. I know overseas they tend to work in net, but we publish our books stuff with total, but I work in net and total for individuals. Righty-ho, so that's been about double the amount of time that I said I was going to talk about, but hey, your comments have been great. Thank you for joining me. Just to summarize, I think at this point in time, from a public health perspective, I think dietary fiber is particularly important for gut health. If you have issues with the gut, particularly constipation, sometimes more fiber and fluid can help, sometimes less fiber can help, sometimes more fat can help. It's a very, very individual thing, and it needs to be worked out individually. I think that we need to, instead of going, oh, that's nonsense, we need to look at things, look at the controversies, critique the studies, and also find out what works for us to make up our own mind. Again, I sit in the high fiber, moderate to high fiber camp for public health, but I would advocate that most of your fiber comes from vegetables, nuts and seeds, and fruit. Last question I'll take, Janet. Is it true that you can damage your metabolism if you're not eating much each day, 1,200 calories? Look, I think that's what mainstream would like us to believe. But in actual fact, I had a client today that she was super healthy. She lost weight, and her metabolic health was in peak condition, and she was doing a bit of intermittent fasting. So on some days she was doing 1,100-1,200 calories. Other days she was doing 600-700 calories. And for her, only averaging around 1,000 or 1,100 calories was something that suited her. She was not getting a damping down in her metabolism. So I think that as a mainstream argument, if you go too low calories, you're going to damage your metabolism. I think it very much depends on the individual. For some people, it's fine. For some people, particularly those who are doing a lot of exercise, that might not be okay with them. Okay, so hopefully I've answered all your questions, and I'll try answer more as they come out. But I've got my dinner waiting, and it's got lots of fiber in it. I saw my trusty husband had made it, and there was some broccoli in it, and there was some corn in it, and there was some capsicum and some mushrooms. So I'm up for a high fiber dinner. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. And again, if you like this content and you like the style and what we talk about being quite wide, then PK 102 nutrition course might be something that you might be interested in. Contact the Precure team, and yeah, educate yourselves. Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. Nice to see you, and all the best with your nutrition and your health.